Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel as we continue to look back at the 2025 NFL Draft. We've been trying to get to know as much about some of the players that the Giants have drafted as we possibly could, both here on the YouTube channel and on our website at bigblueview.com. And today we are going to talk about one of the most fun picks in the 2025 draft for the Giants. That is running back Cam Skattebo out of Arizona State. And here to help me do that is a young man who played with Skattebo for the last couple of years and is now a coach at Arizona State, Trenton Bourget. Trenton, thank you so much for hopping on for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me.
So Cam was with Arizona State for the last 2 seasons, correct?
Yes, sir.
So tell me, we all know his reputation. We all know, some of the stories that you hear about Cam. Tell me, how quickly, when he arrived at Arizona State from Sacramento State, how quickly did you realize that there was something maybe a little bit different about this guy?
Yeah,
that maybe there were some screws a little bit loose.
Yeah, obviously, when he came from Sac State, nobody really knew him. We saw highlights of him, making some crazy runs, and he was the type of guy that, if he was 10 yards away from the end zone, he could, easily just, jog into the end zone, but he would slow down on purpose to let that last defender come, and, he would give him a hit stick or something like that. But I remember when he first came in, I mean, he was just, kind of quiet, at first, he let his play do the talking, but once he got more comfortable, obviously, you're going to hear his voice, and he had the long flow, at the time. But yeah, I remember that first year with him, it was just kind of crazy to see, how athletic he was and everything he did, whether it was football, basketball, he can golf, he can play pool, he can do everything. So, but it was just cool, just awesome to get to know him over the years, and it's just exciting to see what he's done.
Heard he can punt too.
He can punt. Yeah, I mean, that 23 season, I mean, he played quarterback, receiver, punter, kicker. I mean, he truly could do it all, a jack of all trades. Yeah, he's a very special player, and he's even a better person.
Yeah, and he's probably a better golfer than I am too. I don't know. You ever play golf with him?
Oh yeah. No, I remember, we started golfing a couple years ago together when he first got here in 23, and we probably played over 30, 40 rounds together. He's in my family scramble all the time. He's gonna miss it this year, obviously, being out there in New York. But yeah, no, he can smoke the driver, over 300 yards. But as far as he hits it, straight, he can also hit it sideways. But he's a fun golfer, and he's definitely gotten better over the years.
Oh man, it takes me. I mean, I'm old, but it takes me. I can only dream about 300 yards. It takes me 2 good shots to go that far. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
It takes me 2 good shots to go that far.
Yeah, no. He's got the distance and everything. He's pretty good.
So I'm definitely jealous. So you're practicing with this kid, the first time 2023 season. How long did it take you to realize that this kid was just different?
Yeah, I remember
handing him the ball.
Yeah, I remember in spring ball, and when he got there in 2023, I feel like outside of football, we didn't really talk much. Obviously we had a bunch of different guys, different coaching staff, so didn't really get to talk a lot. During football, it felt like. But I just remember there was one day, after practice, he ended up coming over to my house, and we were watching the Sacramento Kings, and obviously him being a Kings fan, it kind of just popped. We ended up, I think he stayed at the house, for like 3 weeks straight, and just talking football and understanding, this guy he's not just a typical running back. He sees the game from a different perspective. And, playing that season with him, he'd be back there with me, and they would change front. They go from even to odd, and, he'd be like, hey, check to counter, check to this and that. And it was like, we were already on the same page, which I think was super cool to have a running back that, saw the game from a quarterback's perspective and understood when there was going to be a blitz and stuff like that, which I think, it's just very, and that's why you see what he did on Saturday and, those big time games, that he just made it look so easy, because the game to him, he's able to slow it down in his mind.
Can you imagine, knowing the reputation, the way that he plays, what we know about his personality? Can you imagine how big a star he's going to be in New York if he hits, and if he's the kind of player in the NFL that he was at Arizona State. Can you imagine the kind of star he might be?
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to him like 20 minutes ago. He's out here, putting in work, each and every day, trying to get ready to go out there and do his thing. But like I've said, it's all been a part of God's plan. And I think, if he just does what he does best and tries to be the best Cam he can be each and every day, he's gonna take that stage by storm.
And let's just talk about look at the 2 years he was with you guys. You have a favorite play, a favorite run, a favorite moment from a game for him, or are there a few of them?
There's a couple that come to mind. I've seen him. I saw him throw a touchdown pass in the Rose Bowl against UCLA to kind of, put that game, seal that victory. I saw him break two crazy runs against Utah this past year. That was just unbelievable. I mean, you think it's going to be a 2 to 3 yard gain, and he just, makes some jump cuts here and there, and then stiffs arm a defender off, like he's like playing against, little kids, and then. I think the Big 12 championship game. I mean, the first carry, I think he went for like 60 yards, just breaking 6 7 tackles. And I'm now with the running backs here at Arizona State. So this past offseason, I've been making a cut up. We call them scat plays. Plays that were great plays, but if it wasn't scat, it would have been very tough to do. And I think the cut up I made was easily over 100 and 15 plays where it's just he gets 5 yards, it's a great play, and then 30 yards later and 5 tackles later that he broke, it's like that's a scat play. That's just something that he does. And the one thing that he does very well as well, also is he has great hands for a receiver. He can catch the ball in the backfield, which that's a quarterback's dream. To be able to put your running back, one on one with the linebacker or safety in space. That's something that he does really well. And you guys saw that against Texas. Left sideline, call that play in the dirt. Sam rolled out right, threw it back left to Scat, and not only did he catch it, but he slowed down, shielded the defender off to not make a play, and that's just something that he can do very routinely, and I can see him doing that at the next level.
Scat plays, I like that. I
Yes,
like
sir.
that. I'm gonna have to put that in the notebook
There you go.
and keep track of those once we
Yes,
start
sir.
seeing games.
Yeah, you're gonna see a lot.
Um, the the phrase that I love when I read scouting reports about Cam is the Lance Zierlein from NFL.com in his scouting report used the phrase "carnage creator." And I mean, how apt do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that describes him, very well. I think there's, so many words that can describe him with, tough, physical, passionate. I mean, he's gonna give you everything he's got. Every single play you saw him, throwing up, in games, just from, everything that he was pouring out onto the field, and no matter whether he's down a lot or he's up a lot, he's gonna give you everything he's got.
Yeah, something about throwing up on national television that's memorable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That always be talked about. Yeah, once he finally, got everything up out of his system, I think he had a bad omelet that day. He was saying, and once he got that up, you saw what he did against Texas.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a story out there. Um, I don't know if you've heard this. I'm sure maybe you have. There's a story about him as a young kid putting on his brother's football equipment and running
Yep,
into telephone poles.
sounds about
Have
right.
have you? Can you can picture that?
Oh, I can picture that for sure. Yeah, his mom's definitely told me about that story a couple times, and I mean that's just what makes scat scat, and those polls definitely helped him out later because I mean he runs through defenders like that and doesn't even feel them.
That's insane. Running into telephone poles. I think he was interviewed and he said, he's been running over people since he was 6 years old. So
Sure. I believe it. I believe it.
yeah,
I've seen it.
yes. Tell me a little bit. You mentioned the fact that he can catch the ball. He's what, 5'10", 5'11",
Yeah.
219, 220. Um, anything about his skill set, anything about him that that the scouting report doesn't tell you? I mean, that would be surprising to people, as a player.
Yeah, obviously everybody was always talking about his speed and everything like that, but I think with Scat, and football players in general, there's so many traits that you can't measure, with the stopwatch or measuring. And I think with him, it's just the physicality he plays with. I mean, it takes a lot of people to bring him down, and you go low, and he doesn't feel like you even touched him, and he's just gonna push and grind each and every play. And I think he's just so explosive. There's times where I think when he first got here, he was kind of too fast, reading holes, and he would see, the grass and hit it. But I think, as the season went on this past year, his patience definitely developed over the years. And Coach Aguano, one of the best running back coaches in the nation, definitely has helped him, transform his, able to see the game a different way. And, once you put his vision and his speed and his, contact balance all into one, I mean, it's something that's super hard to find, and it's very rare. But, in Scat, he's a special running back. And I think, you guys just have to see that for the first time in person, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
It's interesting that you mentioned patience for the simple reason that you think about power, we think about stiff arms, we think about him, bouncing off tackles, running through tackles, but patience is not a word that would come to mind, but patience for a running back to find the hole, to let the play develop is an incredibly important thing.
100%.
So, yeah. So is that something you said that he kind of had to develop over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I would say, there are definitely times, early on in his career and, here at Arizona State, there were times where, we would do wild scat formations, we would call him, and, he would just get it and just run straight ahead. And, Coach Dillingham and Coach Juan would just tell him, hey, you got to be patient. Let that guard pull and kick out that defensive end. Cause, he's so used to taking on the defensive end himself. He doesn't need the guy. But I mean, there's a couple runs against Arizona this year, we're running counter, and he's literally, it feels like he's walking behind, our left tackle, kicking out the defensive end, and then he's coming, through the hole, and the guard, leads up to the backer, and then Scat, bursts for 30 or 40 yards. But I think that's one thing he's definitely, taking advantage of, is really just trying to be patient, take what the coaches are giving him. And, it reminds me of, watching old Le'Veon Bell highlights, and, Rashad White, down at the Bucks, he does a great job with patience as well. And, there's just another, work of, Coach Aguano that he's, instilled in Scat.
I'm interested, there was some discussion of just how many hits he's taken already, how much quote unquote mileage there is on the tires. Um, is that a concern at all?
I wouldn't say so. No, I mean, obviously every running back has taken a lot of hits over their careers. And with Scat, he embraces that, which obviously this year, he's gonna, have to, realize, your availability is your best trait. So, you got to, stay healthy. And he does a great job of taking care of his body. I mean, he's always in the training room, hopping in the cold tub, stretching out, doing everything he can to make sure he's close to 100%, if not 100% each and every week. And, I'm just excited to see him, do that at the next level and, be available.
What's he like away from the field?
He's awesome. He's probably one of my best friends. We got really close, the past 2 years. I had a younger brother that's a quarterback at Western Michigan. And on our bye week, Scat's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to, Kalamazoo. I'm going to go watch my brother. And he's like, can I go? And we're like, heck yeah. I feel like he's like a long lost brother of mine. He does everything. He comes out to my brother's tournaments, and, he'll come to family dinners. He'll just come over to the house to hang out. Really family friendly. He's got a couple dogs, so he loves his animals. Great family, just super supportive of him. And he loves sports. He loves, hanging out with friends and everything. And like I said, how he is on the field, that's how he is off the field. He's loving, very funny, but he's competitive in everything he does. So whether it's checkers, basketball, golf, football, you're going to get the competitive out of Scat.
What do you think is is what's the ceiling for him? I mean, are there NFL players that you think of, past or present, that he reminds you of a little bit? Or is he just his in a category of his own?
I think he's one of one. Obviously I've been here at Arizona State with some great running backs, and I think everybody's, so unique in their own way. But yeah, with the physicality that Scat brings, as well as, the intangibles as well, being able to catch the ball, he's a 3 down back. He's great in pass pro. He's very smart in very different ways. So I think it's tough to, compare him to anybody. But like I said, as long as Scat, does what Scat does, I think he'll be very successful.
I think of Brandon Jacobs, former
Yeah.
Giant, who
Yeah.
the difference, Brandon Jacobs was 265 pounds,
Yeah.
but I think of tone setter who sought out contact because he wanted to let people know, which guys were the tougher guys.
100%.
And that made, when the Giants were in the days when Brendan Jacobs was a Giant, that's the Giants were winning.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, from the perspective of a quarterback, just how nice is it, to be able to turn around and hand the ball off to a guy who, who can get those tough yards, who can set the tone like that, who can really, establish the physicality, maybe that sometimes you think of your offensive line, establishing.
Yeah, I mean it's a great asset to have. I think one of the things I always think of Scat, is when we have our openers, of the first play or the first couple plays of the game, Scat is always like, just give the ball to me. Obviously, he's not trying to be selfish. He's like, give the ball to me. Go, let's run duo, and it's me and one on one with the mic, and I'm gonna set the tone. It's gonna set the tone for the linemen to see that their running back is gonna run downhill. It's gonna set the tone for the receivers to know, hey, they're gonna have to stack the box, and once they stack the box, it's gonna be one on one outside. It's going to set up the play action. I think that's one thing with Scat that this past year with Coach Arroyo did a great job of was, getting that running game going early, making the defense go from two high to one high. And then from there, you can take shots all over the field. So you really just got to pick your poison. I think Scat is just so diverse. He can run outside zone, counter, power. He can catch swings out of the backfield. You can split him out wide to slot. He's just so diverse, able to, be so diversified, out there on the field that it's very hard to stop.
And you wouldn't think of that, all the different things he can do with a guy that's built that way.
Exactly. You think a lot of people just think of him, they see him, stocky. Oh, he's like a fullback type guy. No, he's a true running back that can really do it all. He's going to be able to, break runs here and there. He's going to be able to run through the defender. He's going to be able to stiff arm, make you miss in space. And I think that's, one of his biggest credits is he's able to, just make, a 3-4 yard gain into 12 yards. And then that 12-yard gain goes to 20. So I think it's just, you can never, count him out on a run. It's definitely going to take a lot of people to bring him down. And I'm super excited to see him play.
And I assume that you can see him sort of quickly becoming a fan favorite with the
Oh,
Giants.
for sure. You're gonna, Scat is gonna be Scat. It doesn't matter where he's at. Whether he's at dinner, whether he's at, at the mall, on the field. He's always just, super, super real with you. He's gonna, just, he's gonna kill you with that smile. You're gonna see him smile and laugh and joke around. And I think that's just what makes him special is that he doesn't try to be somebody that he's not. He's not gonna try to, act different in front of the cameras or in front of, his teammates or whatever. He's gonna be who he is, and I think that's what makes him so special.
I love that. He's going to kill you with that smile.
That's right. That's right. He gets you with that smile and he starts joking around and stuff and gets the guys all. And I think that's one thing that, makes him special is this year, being on the sideline and watching him on the field, when he had a big run, I mean, that defense was getting amped up. They were getting fired up. And, vice versa. When the defense had a big run, Scat was fired up for the defense. And I think that's one thing he does a great job of is his first year here, he wasn't very as vocal and it's maybe not as much of a leader for the whole team. But this past season, I mean, when he spoke up, everybody listened. They knew, it was time. If Scat spoke up, it was something serious. And I think that's what made him such a great leader this past year.
Absolutely. All right, Trenton, I really appreciate the time and the insight. And we will look forward, or I will look forward to getting to meet Cam Skattebo here in a couple of weeks at rookie mini camp. And again, thank you for the time. Best of luck to you as you begin your coaching career.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Forks
All
up.
right. Thanks. Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.